Good evening, everybody. Hopefully, y'all are doing fantastic. I am back at it, kind of. You'll notice that the setup is a little bit different for those of you that are regulars. I'll be back in my normal setup hopefully soon, next week or so. That being said, I am back at home. Happy to be there. Happy to be here with y'all and talk a little bit about the 49ers, man. Training camp is around the corner. I'm super excited about that. I'm going to give you a list of all the things I'm going to be looking for the first time in a long time. No quarterback conversation is really relevant unless you want to talk about backup quarterbacks. So I'm excited about that. There's a lot to look for at training camp this year. I will be attending 4 days. I'll give you those dates a little bit later on when we discuss it. We're going to talk a little bit about Kyle Juszczyk and how he wasn't offended, but hurt by the 49ers asking him to take a pay cut. And then we're going to talk about receiver and how that parlays really my thoughts when I watched it and some of the concerns that I had, and then how that parlays into what Deebo Samuel tweeted. I believe it was just yesterday. So we're going to talk about all those things. We're going to talk about that plus more, and we're going to do it all next. All right. Welcome back to Last Second Sports. We are giving you our take down to the last second, and I'm flying solo dolo tonight. It is not a new setup. Clutch Gene, I see you. What's up, Marco? This is technically my old setup and my temporary setup. For those that have been here for a long time know that this was my old background. This is essentially my man cave. Where I do work now is kind of tucked in the corner of the man cave, and I've made a nice little studio over there. The problem is, and the reason I was out of town for so long, is I'm getting all the floors in my house redone. Things don't always go as planned, and so I'm back. Things aren't quite done. I've got about another week or so before the floor is completely finished, and that means that I've got to go back to my old, now temporary studio. But it's a good background nonetheless. I got a lot of cool things back there. It's just not ideal to have a desk in the middle of a room when it's a room that's used quite a bit by your kids and what have you. That being said, I hope everybody's had a fantastic few weeks. Not ideal either to leave essentially for 3 weeks. I brought all my stuff with me, planned on streaming like normal. And I don't know what it is with Oregon, but the internet there is not great for whatever reason. I mean, I stayed with multiple family members, stayed with my sister and brother-in-law, nicest house you can think of, terrible internet. I stayed with my mother and father-in-law, great house, terrible internet. Different providers, doesn't matter, it all sucked. So I essentially took the better part of 3 weeks off, is the way that it went. Again, not ideal, but it was probably the right time. I do feel refreshed, ready to go, and I'm more than excited for training camp, which is right around the corner. Man, there's so much going on in a couple weeks, and I cannot wait for it. But some of this, you guys, I'm sure, have heard on other shows. I've got to imagine that other people have talked about it. And I'm just kind of catching up on everything. When I decided that I wasn't going to stream because the internet wasn't great in Oregon, I was like, you know what? I'm not really going to pay big attention to Twitter, social media, 49ers in general. And so I'm coming back and kind of getting maybe some old topics, but I have some thoughts on them and I want to talk about them. The most recent one is obviously the show Receiver. Fantastic show. If you haven't seen it and you're a 49er fan, shame on you. I watched basically all the episodes the night before I left, and then on the plane on the way back home, and then over the weekend, I guess. Great show. Shout out to Peyton Manning for putting this thing on. He did a great job last year with quarterback. I thought it was a fantastic show then. I think it was a fantastic show this year. And fortunately for us 49er fans, I mean, a big part of it turned into the San Francisco 49ers, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel. They had 2 players involved in this show. And knowing that the 49ers went to the Super Bowl, spoiler alert, they make it back to the Super Bowl in this show. Um, we got a lot of 49ers content because they were the only ones there out of the guys that were on the show. And we got a little bit of a glimpse into Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo stands. Go ahead and stand up. That wasn't great, right? Devontae Adams kind of made him sound about as bad as you could. But I think most of us kind of knew he wasn't really that good and was propped up by the 49ers for a long time. But the 49er content was great. Really enjoyed the show. I just watching Deebo, watching George Kittle, you get an appreciation for who they are as people. You know, Deebo Samuel, I think sometimes players are portrayed a little bit different than what they actually are. He actually came across like a really humble family man. And maybe that hasn't always been the case. I think, you know, having kids can change you. He's close to 30. You know, he's maturing as a human, as a football player, as an adult, as a father. So who he is now, or who he at least portrayed to be on this show, which I think we got a good glimpse into who he actually is. They were followed around quite a bit, cameras in their face all season long. If you're being fake, it's probably going to come out at some point. I really like who Deebo Samuel showed to be as a person. Not, you know, as a player, we think he's great. Obviously, we love Deebo, but as a person, I think he showed to be pretty mature, very smart, and just a good dude, really. And I don't know if the perception of him was necessarily that before, but I can say that the perception that most people should have leaving that show is pretty much what I laid out. And I think he showed well for himself. I think George Kittle showed exactly who he is and who we all kind of thought he was. I love that he gets loose, has fun, enjoys himself. I'm just being real with you. If he was my coworker, I'd hate working with George Kittle. He's not serious enough for me in big time moments. He's always got something to say. He thinks he's super funny, and then he's got to go around to everybody telling the same joke and trying to get the same laugh. It's like, I'm thinking of it as somebody that's older, obviously, and has kids, and watching Deebo Samuel and how mature he came across. George needs kids. George needs to be a father. I think if George had a father, or excuse me, had a kid and was a father, that he would mature up a bit. I'm not saying that he doesn't take his craft seriously. I'm not saying he doesn't work hard. I believe all those things. I know all those things. I know that he loves the game. But man, the way that you get loose, at least for me, this is just me speaking as if I'm a player on the team or as if I was a coworker of him in real life. He would irritate the hell out of me. I'm just being real. And so it's kind of funny because you go back to Brock's rookie year where the Seattle game, he told George in the huddle to shut the hell up. And then George, after the game's wearing the Jimmy Garoppolo shirt, even though he's got Brock Purdy sitting next to him, super weird. And you can kind of tell the vibe there was just irritation. I think that speaks to exactly what I'm talking about. And I think it also speaks to Brock Purdy's maturity, who at that time was 21 years old or what have you, 22 years old. George Kittle's 29. And the maturity level is just way different, even though Brock himself doesn't have kids. But he's a quarterback. And I think being mature, being a leader of a franchise, being the signal caller, I think you have to mature a lot quicker. And you see that from Brock. Again, I think George, hell of a player, works his butt off. Love him. I'm a fan of his. I got his signature. But if I was his teammate, I would be irritated as hell with George. That's just me personally. That's the way he portrayed himself. That being said, you know, one of the things that I really took from the show was just how hard it is to go win a Super Bowl and how dialed in that team was as a whole. It wasn't just George Kittle and Deebo Samuel. I mean, we saw lots of clips of a ton of players in the locker room, little excerpts, what have you. But one thing that I noticed is that this team really thought last year was the year. They all believed that to a T. And we felt that as fans. I mean, let's let's just go through the course of the season. First of all, training camp, mostly everybody that was a big time player stayed healthy. Team looked really, really good. I was there week 1 in Pittsburgh. Couldn't have showed out better. I mean, we're talking about a Pittsburgh Steelers team that eventually made the playoffs, a team that is always ready to go, a team that usually starts fast, a team that was home, and the 49ers went in and absolutely mopped the Steelers on the road, which is not normal for the 49ers. A lot of times we talk about how they start slow. Not this year. They started out about as fast as they could. They start out 5-0. Ayuk misses a game. Doesn't matter. They're scoring 30 plus every game with ease, cutting through NFL teams like a hot knife through butter. Started out about as well as it could. Then there were some injuries. You had the Deebo injury, the Trent Williams injury. CMC wasn't quite right. And they go on a 3-game skid. No problem. Come out of the bye, and they are just as hot as they were to start the season. You had the little bit of a hiccup against the Ravens. Some people call it fluky, what have you. Either way, they get the bye week. They rolled through the season about as easy as they could have. Made it to the Super Bowl. We all felt confident. There was a time where this team had just beat the dog piss out of the Dallas Cowboys. And we're like, is this team going to go undefeated? Like, this is the best team we've seen since 94, right? Overshadowing teams that had made NFC championships and Super Bowls over the last 10 years. And we're looking at this team going, this is the best team we've seen since 1994. A lot of us thought that. I know I thought that. And still, they fell a little bit short. And so the question that I have is, all right, well, everybody seemed to think that last year was the year, and it wasn't, unfortunately. They were very close, but they came up short. So you have to wonder, is everybody on that same page? Like, in their heart of hearts, if every player that was there last year was strapped to a lie detector test, would they pass that lie detector test if you ask them the question, do you truly believe in your heart this year's the year? Like, do you believe as much as you did last year? I don't know. I'm not going to say that they do or they don't. I mean, that's all speculation. It's just a question. I don't know if they do. Maybe they do. Maybe some do. Maybe some don't. But I think we as fans, as the season progressed, we felt that confidence. And then seeing it on this show, they definitely had the same swagger that we did as fans. I mean, we fed off their energy. And maybe we'll get that back. I'm just saying right now, me as a fan, going into last year, I felt so good that they were the best team. I don't necessarily feel that this year. And maybe that's just being down. Maybe I'll feel that way after training camp, right? Because last year I did get to go to training camp, got to see the team up close. It was like, man, team's good. Team's good. Predicted 12-5. I said they would get to the Super Bowl and eventually lose. But I was confident in that. And then as the season went, I was like, well, you know, the whole thing about losing in the Super Bowl? No. They're going to win the Super Bowl. Picked them to win the Super Bowl. And they just fell a little bit short, unfortunately. So maybe after training camp, maybe I'll have the same feeling. But one thing that I am excited is that as I go to training camp and I exit training camp, I'll know, does it feel the same? Does it look the same? And if it doesn't mean that as the season progresses that I won't eventually get that feeling back, but it's just a question. And Deebo Samuel tweeted something out yesterday that I think is kind of sobering, because I will say this, doing these streams and talking about being a little apprehensive for me anyways, on picking the 49ers to win the Super Bowl and thinking that they're going to just roll right back there, and not only roll back there, but all of a sudden they're going to overcome what they couldn't last year. For me, I haven't had that same swagger. And I asked the question a few minutes ago, if players were strapped up to a lie detector test, would they have the same swagger at this moment that they had this time last year? Remember, they lost to the Eagles, and the way that they lost, they felt like they were the best team. So it was like, all right, redemption. Well, this year they knew they were the best team and they still didn't win. So how do they feel now? Well, I think Deebo Samuel at least peeled back the curtain a little bit. And he did so with the tweet yesterday. He said, I wish MFers would stop acting like it's so easy to get to the Super Bowl and winning. I don't even think y'all really get it and understand for real, for real. And I guess what I'm saying is, as I do these streams and I see the comment section and I talk about how apprehensive I am to just pick the 49ers and maybe how I'm not as confident in the fact that they'll be back there. A lot of people in the chat, a lot of people on Twitter when I'm having conversations are like, they're still the best team. They're still the best roster. They made it last year. They should just make it back this year. Well, yeah, maybe. But they didn't win it last year. So even if they make it back, like, why would they win it this year? Right? Like, I'm not saying they can't or they won't, but to just have that blind confidence like they will. And I think Deebo's seeing it too. That's who he's responding to. I think he's responding to people that are frustrated that they didn't win, obviously. And I'm sure he sees that on the timeline, but also people that just assume that it's going to be easy and they're just going to waltz right back to the Super Bowl and win the whole thing. He says it's not easy. And that if you really understood how hard it was, maybe you wouldn't be as confident. Right. And so I just think that was some interesting insight from Deebo Samuel, because it's exactly how I've been feeling. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it plays out. But in this moment, definitely not as confident as I was last year. But hopefully the 49ers start out 5-0 again, 6-0, 7-0, whatever. Really, it comes down to the number one seed. Like, that number one seed last year was so important. And I think this year even more so, right? Like, as the team ages, it becomes more important to get the number one seed. You can see like all the little nagging injuries, not just from the 49ers that were on the show, but also the other players that were on the show. I mean, play in and play out. These guys are just getting beat up, man. It's so tough to go through a season, get your one bye week, and then if you don't get the number one seed, it's like really, really hard for a team to just feel good and be healthy. I mean, you saw Deebo and Kittle both leave the Super Bowl. Not because they're weak or don't have pain tolerance, but because they got hurt at the worst possible time. The biggest game of the year, they both got hurt. Now, luckily, they were both able to come back. Deebo wasn't as effective as I'm sure he wanted to be. He was should have been more of a decoy. For some reason, the game plan was still built around him, but that's not his fault. He tried. Both of them tried. Both of them played their butts off. Everybody played their butts off. You just don't know. It's hard to make it through a season. It's really, really, really hard to make it through a season. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes this year. Dave says, this is how it was when I first found you. Nostalgia. He's talking about the background. Yeah. You saw a lot of this, and then eventually I moved back. You see the fireplace? I moved back and sat on the fireplace, actually, with like a pillow cushion under my butt because I didn't want to sit on hard stone. Just had a little fold-up table in front of me, a webcam. Some of you guys remember. Appreciate you, Dave. Follows it up and says, hat old too. Good to see you, Jess. 80s hat. Actually, you know what? I'll have to find it later. And I shouted him out in the DMs and told him I appreciated him. But somebody sent me this website to get this hat. And then I got a 90s one. It's a corduroy's hat with like the 90s, like 49ers on it. Pretty slick hat, not going to lie. This one's sweet. It's like wool. I don't know if it comes through on the camera, but it's wool. It just, gives you the old vibes, man. The 80s style. I love it. I love this hat. 90s one's sick too. But I already have a couple corduroy ones. Like this one's not only wool, but it has the leather strap in the back. It's not a snapback. It's like the leather drawstrings. You know what I'm talking about. Sick hat. This hat's super dope. So if anybody wants to link, and I wish I had the gentleman's name that gave it to me, but shout out to him. Hell of a find. John V says, Jesse, welcome home. House looks absolutely fire. Hell of a background, my guy. Your hard pause. I think he means your hard work certainly pays off. Your hard certainly work pays off. Yeah, hard work certainly pays off. Appreciate you, John. Thank you so much, man. You were here actually last Monday for the stream. I saw you in there. Thank you again. And then Samir, member for 7 months, says, great to see you in high definition again, brother. Yeah, that's the other thing. When I travel, it's always the webcam. Like I'm not logging around a whole big camera, risking breaking it, all those things. So anyways. All right, here's another topic that I've noticed coming up, and I totally understand it, especially after watching receiver, why people would be just all about Deebo Samuel. And you should be. I mean, Deebo's a hell of a player. He's a phenomenal player. But, and not only that, actually not but Ayuk kind of fallen out of favor with Niner fans, right? Like, how long is this thing going to drag on? And how many things are you going to let play out through the media? I understand the frustration of Niner fans. I personally don't care as much, I guess. I just want him signed. I think he's going to get signed. But I can understand why people would be a little bit frustrated with Brandon Ayuk. I get it. I really do. And then you add in the show receiver where it's like you just see up close and personal Deebo Samuel, who he is as a person. It's like, well, I mean, what are we really talking about here? And then people talk about the record. They were 0-3 this year without Deebo Samuel. Now people are saying, listen, if it comes down to choosing between these two, and it likely will next year, just let Ayuk play on the 5th-year option and let Deebo stick around. Okay, I mean, they're both really good players for sure. I personally don't subscribe to that, though. If I'm choosing between the two at the end of this year, I'm definitely taking Ayuk. For me, it's not a question. I think, first of all, let me talk about the stat. 0-3 last year. Let's not forget that the year prior they were 4-0 without Deebo. Okay. And truth be told, they were 1-0 without Ayuk this year, although that was against a really bad Giants team that was falling apart, awful, couldn't really beat anybody. But that being said, they were 1-0 without Ayuk. And if I were to go through all the opponents without Deebo the year prior, sure that they weren't the best teams either. I get it. And I think Deebo is the more dynamic player. But let's get back to the record thing. They were 4-0 2 seasons ago without Deebo. Okay. One of those games was with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback, and I believe the rest of them, the other 3, were with Brock Purdy at quarterback. Okay. So then you look at this year, and they're 0-3. And I always questioned it because one thing that people forget is that when Deebo Samuel was out, Trent Williams was also out. He missed 2 of those games. And one of those games, he was really hurt, literally said, I shouldn't have been on the field. But I knew that Deebo was out. CMC also got hurt in that game against the Browns, if you remember. And he's like, I can't leave this game. But he knew that he was a shell of himself. So really, he was there, but he wasn't Trent Williams. And they lost that game as well. So they went 0-3 technically without Deebo. But let's not forget that against the Packers, a majority of that game was played without Deebo Samuel as well. Now, I'm not saying it was easy, but it was a playoff game. It was win or go home. It was a tight game. And they did find a way to win that game, right? It's obvious that having Deebo on this team, they're better. Nobody's arguing, is this team better with Deebo or without Deebo? That's not the argument. This team is better with Deebo. This team is better with Brandon Ayuk. If you could just keep them both forever and let them play out their careers, great. But likely you're going to have to choose between the 2 of them. So I think people get caught up in this record thing and they forget actually how things played out. And when you look at it, he's missed 8 games over the last 2 seasons. and they're 5-3 in those games. The 3 losses, they also happen to be 2 of them without Trent Williams and 1 of them with a very banged up Trent Williams, who by his own admission said that he probably shouldn't have finished that game. Okay. That's the real context behind this whole situation. And how about the bigger thing? How about 8 missed games over the course of the last 2 years? It's a lot of games missed. It's far too many games missed. And Deebo is getting older. Usually health doesn't get better as you age. Now, maybe sometimes you can get lucky. I think George Kittle himself is somebody who misses games on a pretty regular basis, a couple games a season. You can count on it almost every year. Not last year. He got older. For some reason, was able to stay healthier. That's great. But generally, as you age, it becomes harder to bounce back. So I'm looking at it and saying, okay, I believe that, first of all, I think Deebo's going to have a great year this year. He's in phenomenal shape. He's dialed in. He knows he's fighting for his 49er life and really a second big contract, I should say. He's dialed in. He's ready to go. So I think he's going to have a fantastic season. Health, I mean, that's more luck than anything. We'll see if he can stay healthy again. But he is very close to 30 years old. Brandon Ayuk is still 4 years away. He just turned 26. I would bet that the best year that Deebo's ever had was the year that he was fighting for that first contract. And I would be shocked if he ever eclipsed that year. So we've already likely seen the best of Deebo Samuel. If you had to bet everything you had on Brandon Ayuk in the season he had, which was a good season, but it still wasn't a ton of targets. It still could have been better. And he missed essentially 2 games he didn't play. And that was a 15-game season he did that in. Because one, everybody sat week 16. And then, week 18, game 17. And he missed the game versus the Giants. But if you look at the accumulation of numbers, I think almost everybody would say the best is yet to come for Brandon Ayuk. So for me, I love the show receiver. I love the way that Deebo showed who he was through that show. I think Deebo's a hell of a player. If I'm just looking at Deebo and I'm looking at Brandon Ayuk, like who's more dynamic, it's Deebo Samuel. He's clearly the more electric player. If I'm betting on one of them to take over a game, just fully take over a game, I mean, Deebo, right? Ayuk is more of like steady Eddie, but he has made some big time plays. I mean, NFC Championship, I was there. It was about as electric of a play that could be made, but he doesn't just take over games the way that Deebo Samuel does. I get that. But you can count on him usually being healthy, always being ready to go, always in shape. He's never had the question of is he or isn't he. We know that he's younger. I think most of us think the best is yet to come. If I have to choose between the two, even with all the things that have happened recently, I would still take Brandon Ayuk, and I wouldn't think twice about it. So I think that a lot of fans are really looking at it, and they're kind of getting caught up in the Ayuk stuff and being tired of it and frustrated. And then they're watching Deebo Samuel being there, mentoring the young receivers, being in shape, watching him on receiver. And I think that they're like, man, like just give me Deebo. And maybe today, I guess if money aside, just for one season right now, for 1 year, maybe I would take Deebo. But we're talking about for the next 3-4 seasons, give me Brandon Ayuk. Give me Brandon Ayuk. And I think people are frustrated now, but assuming he does sign, and I think he will, I think that deal still gets done. By week 3, couple touchdowns, 100-yard game or 2, 6-8 catches. 100 yards, a touchdown, week 2, whenever that comes, I think people will be back on the Brandon Ayuk train for sure. For sure. So I think that eventually it'll be a moot point, but right now it is a real discussion. And I think a lot of people are just kind of fed up with the whole situation and really love Deebo Samuel, as you should. You should love Deebo, but give me Brandon Ayuk for sure. Nico says, will the receiver show give fans PTSD? No, I don't think so, Nico. I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody. You guys say in the chat, why you guys are a better barometer. I'm a little bit different because, and I'll tell you, I didn't think that would ever happen to me. And I've said this before, but I'm just being real. Like, as you make content and you go along, I don't root any less hard for the team when the game is on. But the moment the game's over, it's like I just flip a switch and it's like I gotta get on camera. I gotta check my emotions and I have to be ready to go and discuss the game with an analysis hat on. Jesse the fan doesn't get to really show through big time right after the game because I'm trying to break down what just happened. Now, if you go watch my Super Bowl reaction, I was gutted. that was the one time where you really just saw it in my face, just how upset I was. Another one slipped through the cracks. It's like, how many times does this have to happen? But for the most part, I don't really get caught up in the emotion the way that a lot of fans do and the way that even I did just a few years ago. And just because it's a little bit different for me, covering the team the way that I do and doing the content creation side. So I would say that the chat is a better barometer of, will it give you PTSD? I'm sure there's a lot of people in the chat that's like, yeah, it'll give you PTSD. Maybe don't watch it. I think if you're a 49er fan, it's must watch. It is must watch. And really for me, just watching it through with the fan glasses on, you kind of forget how awesome the season was. Like it didn't end great. And the last episode kind of sucks because you know what's about to happen. But the ride getting there was pretty damn cool. It was pretty special. And I think reliving that and getting a closer look at it should be worth the watch. It was for me anyways. So no PTSD here. Samir says, Ayuk over Deebo, check. But maybe Ayuk and Shanahan over. Oh, okay. You're saying Deebo and Shanahan. Okay, so you're basically saying in a vacuum, player for player, sure, Ayuk over Deebo next 4 years, but Shanahan with Deebo and how much he means to this specific offense and what he likes to do with Deebo, maybe that's a better combination. That's fair. I think that's totally fair. I guess the only thing that I would push back with is the age. I mean, eventually, the way Deebo plays, I wouldn't want to take the risk over the next 4 years that he's just going to hold up as a player who traditionally hasn't held up already, that he's just going to be there in every big moment that you need him versus a younger player that has held up much better. And really because the style of play is completely different, but give me the younger player. Like I'll take Brandon Ayuk in the youth and the ascension over a player that's been fantastic, super dynamic, but hasn't necessarily been the healthiest and is getting closer to 30. Like I'll just take my chances with Brandon Ayuk. But, you know, who's more important for Shanahan? I mean, maybe it is Deebo. I think that might be a fair point. What's up, Jesse? Great name, by the way. Says Niners brass has to change the way they do business. We are essentially giving up the first year of their contract by signing them so late. Yes and no. I mean, really what you're doing is giving up the final year of them being really inexpensive is what's actually happening. Because when they sign the contract, Usually you're doing it before the final year. That's their last year of being inexpensive. And then they start to get paid big time after that, usually. But your point does stand. I mean, either way, we're essentially taking a year and just throwing it out the window as if you can play football on a regular basis at every position until you're 40, 45 years old, like you're LeBron James or Tom Brady, right? Like that's not normal for most of these guys. Their career usually ends or is on the way down 31, 30, 32, what have you. So a lot of these players are getting close, and just throwing a year away when football careers are so short does seem kind of silly. And I agree with this. I think a lot of fans, it's interesting because when you talk about this, somehow a lot of people really back the organization because it's like team first over player. And I get that. But when it comes to something that is very clear and very obvious, that the reason these negotiations for the most part are taking so long is because the organization is choosing that. Yet people still come out and they're like, well, I mean, these things take time. I mean, you don't know that it's not the player. It's like, no, we do actually. There's actually proof out there that it is on the team, but you just want to back the team. Like we had the George Kittle situation. What was it? The Valentine's Day massacre. They were clearly trying to get a deal done in February. They were having conversations. They were ready to sign a deal, and the 49ers were lowballing the hell out of him. They're like, it's the Valentine's Day massacre, was what the agent said. Well, they're ready to sign a deal based off of that. George Kittle also was just on with Rich Eisen and brought it up again. He's like, yeah, I'm not really going to get into the whole contract stuff, but I think Brandon Ayuk will be here, yada, yada. But he's like, the way they do business, that's the words, the way they do, meaning the 49ers, these things tend to take longer, is what he said. Not verbatim, but that's basically what he said. I can give you the quote, but that's almost exactly what he said. I don't remember the perfect words and word for word, but that's essentially what he said is they take a long time to get these things done. We've seen it with other players. This is not out of the ordinary. And then you have Brandon Ayuk coming out on the pivot and saying, yeah, I mean, I was ready to sign a deal. The first couple weeks after the season, we're spending hours on the phone trying to get a deal done. My agent and I, like, we're going hard to get this deal done. We're ready to go. And the 49ers are like, not yet. No, we're not ready. And then a few more deals get signed. It's like, well, now my numbers change. So you come back to me later and you're like, yeah, well, let's get that deal done. And he's like, yeah, but I'm worth more now. The market has changed. So he's saying he tried to get a deal done early, and they would have saved money if they had just signed him earlier. So, Jesse, yes, you're absolutely right. They should change things. It doesn't have to be this way. And by the way, I don't think it's always just them. I think most of the time it's been the 49ers. I think in Bosa's case, it very much was Bosa and his team. I really do believe that. I don't think there was any chance that he was ever going to sign a year early, ever. Like, there's too much money in that family. He was going to bet on himself. He did bet on himself. Defensive player of the year, got paid. But I think as much as the 49ers kind of dragged their feet with a lot of these negotiations, I think Bosa also was a big part of why that particular negotiation took as long as it did, because he was going to squeeze them for every penny. That's just the way Bosa does things. So I think it's not always just the 49ers. I get that. But there's just too much evidence that says, yes, if you're placing blame as to why these things take so long, the 49ers clearly are the main reason that this continues to happen. So, Brother Bob says, I'm late, but I'm sure Nails was late too, as usual. You can't prove it. There's that. You can't prove it. That's one. And even if I was, let's just hypothetically say I was late. If I was, how about you're welcome because you wanted to be here? And I started a little bit later, which means you get to catch more of the show live. Hypothetically, if I were to be late, you should thank me, Brother Bob. Samir says, speaking of age, does Devontae Adams' comment about getting hurt with Jimmy at quarterback make you recalibrate how injury-prone Niners receiving core really was? It definitely makes me consider what I think of Kittle. Well, okay, first of all, many, many, many times, not just myself, but a lot of people were like, this dude is throwing hospital balls. He had the Buda Baker one, the knee injury, and then he had another one that was almost identical where it's like, dude, can you just get some good ball placement and not injure George Kittle? So certainly, but even with that, I mean, every single year, it's not like Jimmy was the quarterback all the time. But maybe, I mean, shoot, he just had a full healthy season. If he does it again, like who am I to say that he hasn't at least turned the corner? Or maybe it was on Jimmy Garoppolo. What I can say though, like when looking at Deebo Samuel, a lot of his injuries are soft tissue, hamstrings, what have you. That's not on Jimmy Garoppolo by any means. That's certainly not on Jimmy. But the Kittle one, yeah, maybe. We'll see. Let's kind of look at it again after this year and see what we actually think. How about that? Let's see another year. Another year. All right. Juice came out and said that he was hurt by the 49ers asking him to take a pay cut. He also came out and said it was super important for him to continue to be the highest paid fullback in the league, and he still is, and that there's no love lost for Kyle and John Lynch. And really, ultimately, the reason he took the pay cut is because he wanted to be a 49er for life. He wants to be here. And I think on the surface, like, it's really cool to hear that. Obviously, there's a camaraderie here. He loves this locker room. You can see how close he is with a lot of the players on the team. You remember when Kyle Shanahan took over, Juice was like the first real signing he made. Like, that was a huge deal. He needed a fullback. And Juice was over in Baltimore just crushing it every year. And he's like, I need this guy. And you could see the vision. You knew right away that him, and then what was it? I think it was the season later. I think it was the next offseason. They went and signed Jet, drafted George Kittle. Clearly, they were trying to get matchup nightmares with linebackers. They're looking across the league saying, or Kyle's looking across the league saying, okay, well, first of all, it's a lot easier for quarterbacks to throw short and intermediate and over the middle and kind of see everything in front of them versus throwing outside the numbers and what have you. Sure, it could be a little bit more risky, but that's an easier throw usually to make because it's right in front of you. And on top of that, beating linebackers on a regular basis is a hell of a lot easier than beating corners. Linebacker depth across the NFL isn't great. Like, there are at least a few teams that have like 3 good corners, 2 good corners. There really isn't many teams that have 2 really good linebackers that aren't named the 49ers. So he's looking at it saying matchup nightmares. And Juice was like the first real big PC signed. So you know how important the fullback position and really Juice has been to the changing of the guard. Like, shout out to Juice being a leader, being a part of this team from the beginning and kind of changing the culture. He was a big part of that. And I totally understand why he would be a little bit hurt. I mean, this is a business ultimately, but it is personal when somebody comes to you. I mean, imagine being at your job and somebody comes to you and is like, hey, I need you to take a pay cut. And you're like, well, I mean, sure, I'll be able to survive on the money you're asking, but I do have a certain lifestyle and I do work as hard as anybody. Like, I was a big reason why your company's as good as it is, quite frankly. I was one of the first people here when you started this damn thing, and now you're asking me to take a pay cut. Like, okay, I'll do it. I want to be here, and I love what we've started, and I want to finish the job, and I love my coworkers, but damn, really? So I understand him being hurt. I'm not going to say, hey, that shouldn't be the reaction he has. I guess my thing is like, why even talk about it? Like, I get it. I love players being real and honest and open and not giving us the canned answers. But I think there's a fine line between the two, right? Like, in order to get fans on your side, you have to be real and candid. I get all of that. However, don't always peel back the curtain and just be honest and talk about how it took you a long time this offseason to get over it and how it hurt you and all those things. Valid feelings. I would just prefer that those things weren't said. I don't know what the impact is. I'm just keeping it real. Like, for me, I would prefer that those things weren't said. Feel them, go through them, talk about them. Hell, you can even talk about them with the front office, your significant other, your family members, your closest friends. I don't know if that's something that I would bring up months after the fact, especially now that you are over it, right? He's over it, supposedly. He says he is. Took him a while to get there. But now you're talking about it. I get he was asked the question for sure. Just avoid the answer. You know what? Things happen this offseason. This team's ready to win a Super Bowl. I'm ready to win a Super Bowl. New season ahead of us. I'm excited about that. I'm not really too worried about any of the things that happen this offseason. Training camp's 2 weeks away. Let's go. Simple. You duck answers all day long as a professional. Probably should have ducked that one. I don't know what good comes from you saying that. I'm not saying anything bad comes from it. Not putting anything on him or blaming him for anything or camaraderie or whatever. But I don't know what good comes from that. Like, I can make an argument. We can make an argument for bad things that could come from that. Most likely nothing bad will come from it. But you can at least make the argument. What good comes from saying that at this time, after you're over it? Clearly you're not, because you're still talking about it. But what good comes from that? I mean, to me, I remember when I was younger, staying out late, going to parties, going to clubs, what have you. And I would stay sober for the most part and choose to be the designated driver. Because one thing that my dad always told me that really stuck with me is nothing good happens late at night or early in the morning other than getting home safely, which is supposed to happen. That's supposed to happen. So what good comes from staying out late? Well, yeah, you would have a good time and you get home safely, but those things are supposed to happen, right? But what bad can happen? What if you're drinking and driving? What if your friend's drinking and driving and you're in the car? What if none of that's happening, but somebody else is drinking and driving? Like, usually nothing good happens at 2, 3 in the morning, but a lot bad happens. There's fights, there's accidents, there's drinking and driving. There's all sorts of bad things that you can talk about that will happen at that time. Now, I'm not trying to compare necessarily Juice's comments to like drinking and driving or anything crazy. I'm just making a statement that sometimes in life, good things aren't necessarily around the corner with a decision that you're about to make. So maybe in this situation, just keep your mouth shut and keep it to yourself. It's been months. Who cares? Season's right there. I don't know. Nee says the Super Bowl episode made me more mad at the defense for the fourth quarter and overtime than I was initially upset immediately after. I know Kyle made mistakes, but the offense didn't leave the field without the lead. This is a great comment. This is a great comment. And not because I agree with it. I completely disagree with it, Nees. But this is a great comment because I see it pretty regularly. And I vehemently disagree. You've got If Patrick Mahomes retired today, he's a top 5 quarterback of all time. I think that legacy is cemented. I really do. I think last offseason, those conversations were being had, and I said, oh, whoa, let's pump the brakes. Okay. Let's pump the brakes. Still way too early. If he retires today, there's so much that's left to be done. After winning another Super Bowl and driving the team down the field twice in those situations to do so, being the main reason that your team won in the clutch, yeah, he's top 5 if he retires today. That's worst case scenario. Some people would say that he's maybe the second best quarterback of all time already. Hell, I've heard people say he's the best quarterback. I'm not going to go that far, but I certainly think he would cement himself as a top 5 quarterback if his career ended right this moment. He was like, you know what? I'm done. It's over. Third kid's on the way. I'm good. Plenty of money. I'm out. Top 5 quarterback all time right now. I think when you leave it in the hands of that guy multiple times, you're playing with fire. And the quote that I remember the most from Steve Young, my GOAT, by the way. I know he's not the best player of all time or the best quarterback of all time, but he's my favorite of all time. He had a comment talking about kicking field goals. And he said, every time you kick a field goal, you're one step closer to losing. Meaning when you get there, you better cash in, because if you don't cash in, you're likely going to lose. Especially if you continuously pass up touchdowns in favor of 3. You're not going to win that game. That's from Steve Young. And that was something that he said as a player when I was very, very young. And I've never forgotten that quote. And I've believed that. I've spouted that quote many times after teams lose when they haven't cashed in on a regular basis throughout the game. And so now you're expecting that not only you can just kick field goals in the biggest game and get away with it and win in any Super Bowl against any team, you know the team across from you is going to be very, very good. They're in the Super Bowl, but you expect to do that against a top 5 quarterback of all time? At worst, top 5 quarterback of all time? You just expect to hand him the ball and give him 4 downs to cash in nonetheless? Not just 3 downs, but 4 downs to cash in. And just, we should be mad at the defense for not holding. Absolutely not. It's funny because when we talk about that game and that regulation, we talk about how the defense held them to 19 points, which is a great number, by the way, against Patrick Mahomes. Should have been enough, but they didn't hold them to 19 points. 7 of those points were on the special teams. Worst case scenario, 3 of those points, 4 of those points were on the special teams. Best case scenario. Worst case scenario, 8 of those points were on the special teams. Let me break that down. We have the missed extra point. Jake Moody, that's 1 point. For sure, on special teams, that's 1 point that the 49ers didn't have on their side of things, okay? But when we look at the defensive side, it's either 7 or 4, essentially. Because you have the muff punt, or not the muff punt, but the one that went off the leg of, I believe, Womack, and that wasn't recovered by the 49ers, put the Chiefs in prime field position. So bare minimum, they have a kicker that is arguably the most clutch kicker of all time, him or Adam Vinatieri, take your pick. And he's got a chip shot field goal. So automatically 3 points, no matter what, is on special teams that the defense gave up. So best case, you can say, worst case, you can say 16 points. That's what the defense gave up. That's worst case. Best case, you can say 12, because really, the Chiefs scored a touchdown on that drive. Now you can say, all right, well, listen, they were in field goal range. Doesn't mean as a defense you have to give up a touchdown. So that's why I say it's 3 or 7, however you want to look at it, right? But that means that the defense either gave up actually 16 points or gave up 12 points to the Kansas City Chiefs through 4 quarters. There is no way that you can expect that defense, without Dre Greenlaw, by the way, Dre Greenlaw is out of this game before halftime. Without Dre Greenlaw, without Talanoa Hufanga, who had already missed a big chunk of that season. We know that Armstead was also hurt. And they had a coach that they really didn't like playing for. And they still were able to do that in the Super Bowl. I absolutely cannot put that game on the defense at all. Now, I don't think it's just the offense's fault either. It was a team loss, absolutely. I mean, really, we probably should blame the special teams. I think I made a pretty good case for that as I talked through this whole thing. Could have easily done that. But then on top of that, you have a decision by the head coach to not kick the ball in overtime, knowing that both teams possess it no matter what. And you, because of that, give the greatest quarterback in today's NFL, top 5 of all time, an opportunity to know exactly what he has to do to go win this game and give him 4 downs to do it. No, I can't blame the defense for that. Absolutely not. Imagine how that game would have changed. Let's just say that they did the right thing and they kicked first. And the Chiefs, whatever, whether they score 7 or they score 3, no matter what, the 49ers have 4 downs every single time that marker clicks over to first down. They got 4 plays to get a first down. And then they can decide, well, if they scored a touchdown, we can go for 2. Or if they kicked a field goal, we can go win this on a touchdown. They have the decision. How much easier would it have been for this offense if they were given 4 plays every single time to cash in on a first down? You'd feel pretty damn confident about that they were at least going to go score. This offense with all those players, Brock Purdy, Kyle Shanahan calling plays, 4 plays. Now imagine giving all of that to Andy Reid, who's even a better coach and the best quarterback in the world. No, I think the frustration is misplaced. I think the credit, not just you, Nees, this is everybody, but I think the credit given to the offense for kicking field goals is way overblown, way overhyped. I think the blame on the defense is unwarranted. If you're going to blame anybody, I would blame the special teams. If you're going to, and again, I think it's a team loss, but if you're choosing a unit to blame, I'm blaming the special teams. And if I'm giving credit to any of the units, it's absolutely the defense for the way that game played out. The offense was just kind of middle of the road all the way through. The defense doesn't deserve the blame at all, and they deserve credit for doing what they did. I mean, let's not forget that they also forced a turnover to start the second half on Patrick Mahomes. They intercepted him, and they were about 10 yards away from being in field goal range. All they had to do was get 2 first downs, and they're in field goal range. Something like that. Maybe a first down and a half, another 5 yards, and they couldn't even get a first down. The offense couldn't even get a first down. And you're mad at the defense? I just can't go. But it's a great comment. And I appreciate you for bringing it up. Big time contributor to the channel. Love you for that. And I have had this conversation on Twitter a lot. I don't know if I've necessarily had it here, so I'm glad that you brought it up. But I think that a lot of people really look at the game the same way you do, and I completely disagree. Brother Bob says, wait, Kyle Levy equals offensive genius and his offense choked. All right. Well, I don't think that's exactly what I said. But that's how you took it. All right, let's talk a little bit about training camp. I was going to talk Kittle and Kelce, but I also still have a lot to do tonight before I start work again tomorrow morning with unpacking and getting the house ready. So I'm just going to get into training camp, which is right around the corner. Right around the corner. And I'm excited. So I'm going to training camp with Coach. Coach and I have got a hotel room. We're going to be there for 4 days. Well, we're going to be there for a week, but we're going to actually be at training camp for 4 days. It's just the way that it fell. So show up on a Saturday. They don't have practice Saturday. They don't have practice Sunday, which sucks. They have practice Monday, Tuesday. No practice Wednesday, I think. Or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. No practice Thursday, and then practice Friday, and then I fly out Saturday morning. So I'm only going to be able to take in 4 practices, but there's a lot to look for. So you guys, you're the audience. You tell me what you want to hear. No, it doesn't have to be now, but think about it over the next couple weeks. I want to see your comments here. I want to see your comments in the videos that are cut up, the videos that you are watching on tape delay. Just post your comments. Like, what do you want reported on in training camp? Like, the channel is for you. It's your channel, right? Like, I run it. I'm the guy on the other side of the camera. I get that. But when I go to training camp, especially, it's your time because not everybody is able to make it. So for those 4 days that I'm there, what do you want to see? I need to hear that from all of you because I need to know what is most important to you. What do you want covered? Now, I'm going to cover it how I want to cover it, and I'm going to do my best to cover it. And Coach is going to be there with me. And so we're definitely going to bounce ideas off of each other. And we're going to be looking at different things and communicating and trying to give the best coverage possible. But what is important to you? So I would love to hear all of that from all of you. But here's the things just off rip that I'm thinking about. 2 weeks out, less than 2 weeks out, actually. These are the things that I'm going to be looking for off the top of my head. D-line depth. How does it look? How do players like Drake Jackson look, who really, dude, you got to cash in. It's now. You got to make this happen. Definitely have to cash in. I want to know, what does it look like without Eric Armstead? I mean, Eric Armstead's been here for a long time. Hell of a player. I get it. A lot of people think he was overpaid, but one thing we can't really argue is that he's a good player. Very good player. Well, he's no longer on this team. And this defense last year struggled stopping the run, especially without Dre Greenlaw and without Hufanga. Without Dre Greenlaw this year, I could see it being an issue. The defensive line is the first line of defense. Now Hufanga will be back, but what does it look like? How does that rotation look? What does the depth look like? And what does the rotations look like? Like, who's starting down 1, who's in on down 3? Those things are all important to me. How does Hargrave look, by the way, if we're looking at defensive line? Last year, he says he was out of shape. Let's see how he looks this year. Does he make a difference? Who's going to fill in for Dre Greenlaw? I mean, there's multiple candidates for sure. I mean, obviously, they went and signed Devondre Campbell. You've got the 2 second-year linebackers there that are going to be competing. Like, who's going to fill in for Dre Greenlaw? And not only that, once we decide who the best player is to fill in, how big of a drop-off is it? I don't think anybody expects that it's going to be on par with Dre Greenlaw. Maybe it is. Maybe they'll get lucky. Maybe it's an Azeez Al-Shaair situation where it's like almost just as good. But I think most of us expect a bit of a drop-off. But how big is that drop-off before he's able to come back? I mentioned Talanoa Hufanga. He's coming back from an injury. What does it look like for him? He's always the first guy out. I imagine that's going to be the same every day at practice. But is he flying around? Is he making the plays? He looked just as quick as he did. I'm curious. How has he recovered from the ACL injury? I want to know what that looks like. Brandon Ayuk, obviously. I mean, this one's low-hanging fruit. We've talked about him all offseason. Is he going to be there whether he's paid or not. Is it a hold in? Is he just going to flat practice? Is he going to hold out? What does that situation look like, assuming he's not paid by the time that training camp is here? I'm curious to see what that looks like. And if he is there, what kind of shape is he in? Is he last year? He was the best player on the field almost every practice. So if he is on the field and he's playing, does he have that same hunger? Is he in as good a shape to where he can just take over practice and be the alpha again? Curious to see what that looks like. Offensive line rotation. Man, I mean, we talk about an important position group. Geez, I mean, this is the most important. Probably the thing we should watch most. I'm glad I'm there with Coach, who definitely knows what he's looking at when it comes to O-line. So I'm excited to get his eyes on it. Let him focus on that probably while I'm looking at some of the other things going on. And then we'll talk about it every day after the show, or excuse me, after practice when we do a show. But what is the rotation there? Who's starting at right guard? Who's starting at center? Is there a real competition? How good is the depth? And if it is the same starting offensive line, is it better? Does it actually look better? That battle between the defensive line and the offensive line is going to be, for me, the most notable thing to watch, because I think both lines are extremely important to pay attention to during training camp. Obviously, the rookies, we got to talk about them. I mean, is Garindo as explosive as he tests, or is he hesitant? Is he just not that good? What does it look like for him? First round pick, Ricky Pearsall, especially if Ayuk's not going to be there. Man, we're going to see a lot of Ricky Pearsall. That's exciting. How does he look, right? How does he look against number one corners? I imagine that he's going to have an acrobatic catch or two, and it's probably going to get people on their feet. And I think it's going to be the top. I will almost guarantee that at some point during training camp, Ricky Pearsall is going to make a super acrobatic catch, and it's going to be the talk of the day. It's going to be posted all over social media. Everybody's going to be talking about it. I think that's going to happen. He's really good at acrobatic catches. I think that's probably going to happen. But more importantly, like, you can splash, but if you look horrible the rest of the time, that's not great. So does he play in and play out? Does he look really, really good? What does that look like? Where is he struggling? Where is he improving day in and day out? Not just him, but all the rookies. But being the first pick overall, especially if Ayuk's not there, it's going to be a big deal. And then the running back position. What does it look like behind CMC? I mean, obviously, the 49ers have arguably the best running back in the NFL. We know who's starting, but who's there behind him? Who's the second running back? What does the competition look like? I mentioned Garindo briefly when I was talking about Pearsall and the other rookies, but there's multiple rookie running backs. We always talk about Mitchell. You know, there were times where he didn't look that explosive. JP Mason, I'll say last year, the biggest gripe that I could say that I had with him is that he clearly didn't know what routes he was supposed to run in the passing game. Does he look more polished this offseason? Does he have a better grasp of the playbook? What does it look like from him? I'm curious. That running back position, you know, maybe CMC misses a game or two. What does it look like behind him? I think that running back position is super important this year. Even if CMC doesn't get injured, it's super important because CMC has to get a breather. He cannot. I'm not saying he physically can't. Like, I'm sure that there's a world that exists where he can physically make it through the season and be good. But I think it's clear that any player with high usage, especially at that rate, at that age, they're not going to be their best all season long. And they're going to break down a little bit. And maybe at the worst time, they need to find a way to get him a better breather throughout the season, more breathers, and keep him healthy, keep him fresh. Not even just healthy. Like, even if he plays every game, they just need to keep him fresh and at his best. So who is good enough to give Shanahan the confidence to remove a player like CMC and put the ball in their hands and allow them to go make plays. I'm curious to see who that player is. Now, we know that he loves Mitchell. Mitchell had probably way more touches than he should have last year. But is he the best player? If he's the best option, then so be it. Whoever it is, hopefully they can go make it clear and give coach the confidence that he needs to allow them to play more football. That's what I would be looking for. So for me, those are the things I'm going to be looking for. I'm curious to see what, if anything, is a little bit different, what you want to see, how you want it covered, those types of things. I'm very, very curious. I want to be your eyes and your ears the best that I can for training camp. The way that I was last year, I want to do that again, but I want to do it even better this year. Last year was the first time. Last year was very quarterback heavy. I understand that, but I want to really bring that atmosphere through to you that can't make it the best that I can. Brother Bob says, bruh, Tom Brady Hurts commercial. Go take the $2, no ads. First of all, the ads are every 30 minutes. They're short. And if you have YouTube Premium, you don't have any ads. And even if you don't have YouTube Premium, the ads aren't guaranteed at 30 minutes. How about this, Brother Bob? Save a couple of those $2 super chats and just buy yourself YouTube Premium. I'm totally fine with that. Like, you can just stop for a week from my channel and just go get YouTube Premium so you don't have to deal with it. The only reason I do the ads is because the ads have to, like, I'm going to run the ads on regular videos, but if I forget to do it for a live stream, then I'm going to forget to do it after. So that means all the replay viewers, like, there's nothing that's going to come from it. So I just have to do it when I'm setting up the stream. Otherwise, I'm just going to forget. So that's why I do it. Nees says, training camp reports, Kyle's mustache situation. For sure. You know, one of the things last year, I don't think I said it on the stream, or maybe I did. I don't know. I know that I tweeted it, but I was tweeting out daily reports on Kyle Shanahan because he has a session where he comes in and like purposely throws interceptions to the linebackers before practice really gets going as everybody's warming up. And so I was giving his stats like he was a quarterback. I'm like, well, Kyle went 1 for 5 today with 4 interceptions. 1 was a pick 6. So for sure, I'm not above the tomfoolery. I'll absolutely give a mustache report. What's the facial hair situation? I'm all about it. Samir says, training camp question. Who's out of shape? Very, very good. I like this. Okay. I like this. I'll say this. One thing that really opened my eyes last year with training camp, and I'm glad that I was there, was the situation with 1s and 2s and how that works. Like, the way it's reported when they were doing the whole quarterback thing over the last few years was, well, so-and-so went 8 of 13 today with an interception going against the 1s, and so-and-so went 9 of 11 against the 2s with the touchdown. But that's not really the way that it works. Like, yes, they were the first quarterback up and the second quarterback up, but all the positions are rotating in and out almost every play. So a lot of times you'll get lucky. You'll be the backup quarterback. You'll get reps with all the 1s and you're going against 2s and 3s. And vice versa. Sometimes that happens for the number 1 quarterback, just depending on how the rotations fall. But it's not just, hey, it's the starters versus the starters, the backups versus the backups. So when it's reported that it was against the 1s with the 1s, that's not the way that it actually goes down. And that was eye-opening because I feel like, and maybe I've glossed over it, but nobody has really brought that situation to the forefront. And so the assumption is just, oh, it's 1s versus 1s, 2s versus 2s, 3s versus 3s, and that's it. That's not the way that it works. So when I was reporting on it, I was trying to be clear. Hey, this player was sitting out, or, listen, Brandon Ayuk was on the field for Trey Lance, and he was going up against the fourth corner. Like, I tried to write those things down and keep track of it. So for me, that was really, really eye-opening. And hopefully I can bring some more of those insights, like who's out of shape, to the forefront that I think a lot of people, there's a lot going on. First of all, I'm not saying any reporter is purposefully leaving out anything. Like, I don't want to act like they're not doing their job and I'm just the best in the world. If I was there every day, I'd give you the best analysis. Like, that's not what I'm saying. But that had been glossed over for whatever reason. Plays happen quick. It's not like the regular football games where the replay gets shown on TV and you get to really write it down and you can rewind it. Like, the play happens once, numbers flash. It's really hard to make heads or tails of who's on the field, who's not, who caught the ball sometimes, how many yards it was the quarterback sacked, or would it have been a sack because they just let the play go? Like, there's so many things that happen. So I understand it, but I'm glad that I was able to see it up close and personal so I could bring that to the common folk. Because for me, it would have been nice to have heard that the previous years, and I just hadn't. So Dave says, how about no ads? I think I explained it, Dave. How about YouTube Premium? Shout out to YouTube. Just selling premium for them. I have YouTube Premium. Gosh. Anyways, hopefully you all enjoyed the stream as much as I do. That was a lot of fun. Jesse says, Jesse, do you think it's possible Purdy can make a jump in year 3 like Josh Allen did, especially with his first training camp as the clear-cut number 1? No. And not in a bad way. First of all, let's be clear. Josh Allen, when he came out of college, needed work. He was not as polished as Brock Purdy. He just wasn't. He came from a smaller college. He had a lot of raw ability. But anybody who watched Josh Allen, and I said Josh Allen was going to be the best quarterback in that draft. And I think that's played out thus far. That being said, I knew that it was going to take a few years for Josh Allen to really get going. So the leap from year 2 to year 3 was very significant, not only because he played great, but because the room for growth was a lot more. Brock Purdy just had a phenomenal year. I think Brock Purdy's going to have a better year. I don't know about statistically, but for sure, I think he's going to look like a better quarterback, play in and play out. He's going to have better grasp of the offense. He's not coming off of a rehab. So I expect that he'll take a leap from year 2 to year 3, but I don't think it'll be as big of a leap because, frankly, I don't think his growth or opportunity for growth is as big because he played so well in year 2, if that makes sense. So, no, I don't think that it'll be that necessarily. Smack Jones says, what happened to the big show with y'all that y'all was doing? I talked about that a while ago, but since you paid, I'll just briefly say it. I decided to kind of do my own thing with that. I do a Thursday show with Marco now, a show that I really, really enjoy. But it was a decision that I made a few months ago. It was a great show. Definitely enjoyed it, but I decided to do something different. And then Brother Bob says, Jesse thinks Stroud will be better than Josh Allen. Facts, you're such a liar. And I hate you. I'm not going to talk about our DMs out in the open, but that's not what I said. Let's be clear about that. Now, he could be. I'm not saying he can't be. I don't necessarily think he will be, but we'll see. That being said, thank you all for sticking with me through 3 weeks of really not being around. Much love. Appreciate you all so very, very much. Have a blessed night. I'll be back tomorrow with Coach on his channel. And then Tuesday, right back here with Sunil. Regularly scheduled program. We're back, baby. 2 weeks away from training camp. Can't wait. Stay blessed. Talk to you soon.